Okay, welcome back from lunch. Let's get seated and start the third session. So this is a session on positive and negative deviance and outliers. So I put up this premise to engage with it from the beginning. The point is that in every community, you will find a few individuals or organizations practicing uncommon but accessible behaviors that allow them to successfully overcome intractable social problems without access to extra or special resources. So these are the positive deviants, the islands of success. So this session is about the PDs. I don't know who is keeping the time. Yeah, sure. So we have 4 nice papers that we are going to have in this session that are talking about positive deviance and negative deviance. And they come from different countries. So the focus is to identify positive deviant behaviors and also say something about how those behaviors can be replicated in neighboring and similar contexts. So we'll hear from Vatsal, presenting about Tanzania and focusing on lower primary grades 2 and 3. And he will tell us about teacher practices, teacher beliefs, and teacher preparation. Then we'll move on to Simon King, who will tell us about early grade reading in Kenya, Nepal, Uganda, and Tanzania. The focus here will be on the non-positive deviants. The third one will be from Sierra Leone, a study of Sierra Leone, a very nice case study in Sierra Leone, focusing on secondary school English and math. And we'll hear PD strategies that are being used. And then finally, we have Sheena and Minahil online, who will take us through a study from Ghana, focusing on 5 districts, a study of management practices and routines. So without any further ado, I'll ask Vatsal to start. And I'm very conscious that we need to recover the 5 minutes we lost at the beginning.
So where's the clicker? Awesome. Okay, the clicker works. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vatsal. And today I'll be presenting a paper where we use machine learning techniques to understand which teacher characteristics best predict student learning outcomes. My co-authors on the paper were Dion, Filmer, and Svetlana. I was basically a research assistant for Svetlana for 2 years until very recently, and this is where I was fortunate to co-author the paper with her. And both of them couldn't come here because end of fiscal year is a very busy time at the bank, so here I am. Awesome, so I'll get started. So our basic research question was, what does make a teacher effective? And when we were researching the literature, what we found was that there's very little evidence on which teacher characteristics exactly matter for student learning outcomes. So whether it be teacher experience, teacher qualifications, teacher practices, what exactly is it about a teacher that ensures that their students end up learning? And this is basically a lot in the teacher value-added literature, where people like Raj Chetty, Jishnu Das have written a lot. And what they've found consistently across countries is that observable teacher characteristics like age, experience, gender are never consistent predictors of student learning. And even when they are, they don't explain more than 5% of the variation in student learning outcomes. And most of the evidence-based is also in developed countries. You have a few studies in Pakistan, India, but Ecuador, but all in all, it's mostly based either in the United States or other developed economies. So the main question is, what is it about a teacher that best predicts student learning outcomes? And the context of our study was, how do you figure this out when you have a very high dimensional data set, right? So you have 50 variables, 60 variables, 100 variables, rather than like 15 or 20. In such a scenario, OLS does not perform as effectively as it should. So in such a scenario, when you have very minute data about every teacher, right? You know so much about that teacher. How do you filter out what is effective and what is not? And in this scenario, how do you conduct variable selection, right? And teacher effectiveness, the literature is based mostly on teacher value added, where the variables, the functional forms are a lot based on the discretion of the researcher, right? So you can have a linear model, you can have a log linear model, but it's based on the discretion of the researcher. So the way we thought about this is we don't know which factors or what about a teacher can interact in which type of way to actually affect student learning. And this is where we wanted to apply more flexible techniques, and which is why we chose machine learning. And it's not like very advanced machine learning, right? So it sounds like a very intimidating thing, but it's actually like very applicable and quite simple once you get into it. And like why we chose machine learning is because firstly, there's very limited researcher discretion on how you build the model. So like one of the models, which is a random forest, you don't need to specify how the variables interact with each other. How do you figure out, like, are they additive or are they multiplicative? It's all done by the algorithm, basically. And you can incorporate very flexible and interactive relationships. And the good part is it can actually take in like 50, 60, 100, 200 variables and operate on any data set. Some cons are that it can sometimes read too much into the data. So any signal it picks up, even though it's just random white noise, it can actually take as a meaningful relationship, right? So our study was basically based out of Tanzania, where what we basically did was we had students from grades 2 and 3 across 6 regions in Tanzania, and the schools and the teacher cohort and the student cohort was very representative of the national sample. And we basically tried to analyze it for 2 subjects. So for math and Kiswahili, we had about 2,300 students and about 340-50 teachers based out of 270 schools. And the dependent variable in our study is basically, we tested the students at the beginning of the year, we tested students at the end of the year, we calculated the differential, and what we did was, if a teacher is teaching 10 students, we average that differential across those 10 students, right? So if I'm teaching 10 students, what is the average student learning gain from the start of the year to the end of the year? And that becomes my dependent variable. And this was broadly like the distribution we saw in terms of what's the percentage improvement in mathematics and Kiswahili from the start of the year to the end of the year for children in grades 2 and grades 3. And we do find like there's an average improvement of about like 14-15% for Kiswahili and a little higher than that for math. And the overview of the explanatory variables, like the independent variables, we had 52 of them. So we had student level controls, we had school level controls, and we had teacher level controls. And focusing on teachers, we had very minute data on who these teachers are, how they think, what their underlying belief systems are, how do they actually practice in the classroom, are they writing things in the notebooks of students, are they reviewing concepts after class, are their students afraid of these teachers, and we also try to capture very internal beliefs, which is something Shwetlana is very passionate about. So we had a module in our surveys capturing very minute details about teacher beliefs, right? So this is a broad overview of like the kind of teacher variables we had. So teacher characteristics like basic, like gender, years of experience, education level. In terms of knowledge, we tested the teachers as well on their math and Kiswahili competencies, and we also tested teachers on what's the knowledge of like how much do they know about their own students, and we also incorporated teacher training variables. In terms of behavior and practices, again, as I said, we have very minute variables. So for example, with teacher beliefs, right? One belief that we really asked them a lot about was what do they think about underperforming students? So we asked teachers, can you really help a student learn if a student comes from an underprivileged background, or if their parents are not as well educated, or if they have too many personal problems? And there was basically an agreement or disagreement sort of Likert scale variable that we have, right? Before turning to the results, I'll spend some time explaining the machine learning models, right? So we wanted like some robustness and stability, so we went for 2 different types of models. One is Lasso, which is very basic. It's basically a linear OLS, but you have you have some penalty term, and I'll come to the equation in the next slide. And that is a linear model. And the other model is basically a conditional inference forest, which can incorporate very flexible patterns in the data. And our idea was if both of these models are selecting similar variables in terms of which teacher characteristics best predict student learning outcomes, we can be reasonably confident that they are picking some patterns in the data, right? Because one is linear, one is non-linear, right? So this is a basic overview. So lasso is basically like you have the OLS minimization problem, plus you add the L1 norm of the beta coefficient. And what this does is it actually biases the beta coefficient to go towards 0, right? So if you have 52 variables, what it'll do is it'll only select those variables to be non-zero which have a much stronger relationship compared to the other variables. So it ensures variable selection in that way. The second model is a conditional inference forest, where what it basically does is it ensures that every student is bucketed into one category or the other, right? So you have n number of variables, and it selects a couple of variables for each tree. So this, for example, is one tree, and it selects these 3 variables, and it partitions the data as per the value of each of those variables, and then it decides, okay, like what's the value of the dependent variable based on each branch. And because it's a forest, right, there are like 500 or 1,000 trees. So what it does, it aggregates the dependent variable values of like all those trees. And what it also does is, if we create like 500 trees, it'll select variables at random to create like those splits. So it ensures that every variable is getting a decent shot at proving itself, whether it's actually predicting student learning outcomes or not. And we also, we run this model 20 times, and we run the lasso model 200 times to ensure that supposing if we get one variable to be important, it's not at random, right? We run the model 200 times, and then we see out of 200 times which variables are occurring as important in 140 of those runs. And for random forest, we did it 14. And running one model takes like about 50 minutes in hours, so that's why we did 20. And what we're basically trying to do is evaluate predictive performance, right? So what we're doing is we're benchmarking these machine learning models to ordinary least squares, where what we're saying is we will have two types of, we'll split the data in 2 ways. There'll be a training set and there'll be a test set. So in the training set, you're basically teaching the model, okay, what's the relationship between the variables? Once it has that, it predicts based on the test model, which it has never seen. So it's actually trying to calculate can I predict something I haven't ever seen before? So if I know 20 teachers, if I see 20 teachers I've never seen before, can I predict what their students are going to achieve in the next 1 year? And we benchmark the performance of OLS, random forest, and lasso, right? And the way we evaluate how good the model is basically by checking their mean squared error. And what we do is, for each model, we divide the mean squared error of the OLS model by the mean square error of the respective machine learning model. And if the value of that is greater than 1 or significantly greater than 1, it means that OLS is not doing as good a job as compared to the machine learning model. And the good thing about the mean squared error is, I can't go into more detail because of lack of time, but it shows that there's a good bias and variance trade-off that the MSc is able to capture. Now, so the key results that we found in this paper was that machine learning was able to outperform standard OLS by about 14% to 24%. So these numbers are basically 95% confidence intervals, where, for example, for math, 1.21 means that the machine learning model was able to outperform the OLS model in predicting student learning outcomes by about 21%. And what we also saw is that teacher covariates were better predictors in math than in Swahili. And one hypothesis could be that these children learn Swahili at home as well. So the degree of substitution or the degree of complementarity that the teacher does vis-a-vis the parent is much, much higher for Swahili than for mathematics. And this is just the distribution that we saw of the relative mean squared error. And we can see that the majority of the distribution is greater than 1. So across, consistently across model runs, across random subsamples of our study, the machine learning models were better at predicting student learning outcomes. The second sort of key result that we found is both machine learning models were picking like 95% the same variables over and over. So if random forest was telling us that this variable is important for student learning outcomes, Lasso was telling us the same. And it was telling us across different model runs. So there was definitely some true relationship that these models were able to capture, right? And again, as the teacher value-added literature has consistently said, we also found that common teacher characteristics were not able to explain or do a good job of finding teacher effectiveness. And what we found is minute teacher beliefs, specific teacher practices were very important in ensuring how well the model predicts student learning outcomes, right? And these were some of the results where in every model we found like that the baseline score was an important factor, because across like teacher value-added studies, it's been found that the baseline score acts as a very good control. So that was an important variable. But the other results we found was that especially the teacher belief that they can help struggling students learn was very important. Now, this can come across as a very obvious point, right? If a teacher believes that a disadvantaged student can learn, that should be a good predictor. But across our surveys, we found, for example, we found in Argentina that about 60% teachers agree when we ask them, is there like, so the question was, I can do little for my students if their parents are uneducated. And 60% teachers agreed with that. And that is quite messed up, right? Because if teachers have that prejudice that they don't have the internal belief that they can do something about these teachers, about these students, that is a sign, that is something that education policy should focus on. So we did find in our paper that these teacher beliefs were very important for student learning outcomes. For Swahili, we found that we also sort of went after how do teachers believe about their performance. So we asked teachers, should strict action be taken against teachers if their students don't perform well? And we found that this variable was very important in helping explain the Kiswahili learning outcomes. Teachers who offered extra help after classroom to students. So we literally asked like each student that after classes, is your teacher like helping those students who are lagging in the subject? And those teachers who did that had like better learning outcomes. And again, in terms of robustness and stability of results, as I said, the machine learning model not only predicts better, but it also finds the same variables. So both models ended up predicting with the same set of variables. And we did this across multiple model runs. And and this is just the last point I'll make, but to also ensure that it's compatible with the literature on teacher value added, what we also did was we found the teacher fixed effect. That's basically what teacher value added does. And we ran the machine learning model on that teacher fixed effect as well, and we found very similar results. So
you have no time.
Yeah, these are some teacher beliefs, as I was saying, like how many % of teachers do what in terms of practices and beliefs. And yeah, that's the conclusion in terms of which variables are important for math, for Swahili, and some limitations. We did have some attrition, but those attritions were fortunately random on observable variables. And with machine learning, the more data you have, the better. So thank you so much. I hope this was insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Simon King. I work for RTI International. I'm also an EdD candidate at UCL in perpetuity, it feels like right now, because of COVID and other things. And I'm sure my supervisor is fine with that as well. So I'm going to start you off with a little passage to read. It's after lunch. I hope you didn't eat the cake at all. You got a little bit drowsy. But if your reading level is kind of average for your age group, it should take you about 20 seconds. Now, to make this a little bit more competitive, I'm going to ask you to do a few things. First of all, guess the country where the passage comes from, the origin. And then the second thing, I've left a word out purposefully. If you can guess that missing word, the RISE directorate has agreed to give you the gold medal prize for RISE 2022 as well. Okay? So 20, 30 seconds, then we'll see if people can actually figure this out. All right, go for it. right, about 5 more seconds. If you think you want to guess the country, put your hand up. Be brave. It's okay to be wrong. We all learn together. Is there a hand over there? Go for it. The UK. Oh, yeah. So I give this to a bunch of Americans, and they're like, "Oh, it must be this place in sub-Saharan Africa." But I've got the wrong audience today. All right, very good. When? After COVID. Actually, nowhere near COVID. Decade?
Why isn't it after COVID? Because they refer to COVID.
Because they're making a link to COVID about how schools have to basically get together and figure things out. It's that. Yeah.
Actually, a long time ago.
All right, so you guys are obviously too young, but this is from the 1980s when national curriculum reform was put into place in England on an education system that had been autonomous for 40 years. And suddenly change happened. What's the missing word? And that's an absolute giveaway if you actually know what it was. Come on, this is for a gold medal. Anybody, at least guess and try and get it.
Ages?
No, go on, get more creative than that. Quick, I'm running out of time.
Donkey's ears.
All right, I took it out. The word is yonks. All right. But this is an early grade literacy advisor from Northwest Norfolk. You can tell it in the accent as well. But welcome to educational change, which is what we'll be talking about right now. And the reality about educational change, that it's fundamentally emotional in how we respond to it. We respond to any sort of change emotionally. Okay, so bear that in mind. This is an unashamed framing effect. All right, so what do we actually get to some work now? What do we actually do? So we started to look at a lot of early grade reading programs over time and then across schools to really start to understand what's happening with these programs and kind of a metadata look. And then as part of my thesis to basically figure out what's going on and what we can ultimately do about it where there's some kind of blockages. So what I deliberately brought in was kind of an behavioral science lens, like behavioral economics and that sort of thing, with systems thinking. But I brought in a lot of theories into this framing of this that didn't just kind of give a stationary look at saying this is what's going on, but they also give a hint towards where the solution is as well, and that's important, or at least an improvement anyway. And then we started to look at variability about how teachers respond within an education system. All right, if you don't know early grade reading programs, there it is. So, impact over time. So this is Kenya Tusome, baseline midterm follow-up, effect size on the left-hand side. And this is a common theme that we have of our reading programs. When they have impact at midterm, they don't continue that upward trajectory. Okay, now Kenya's gone down a little bit. There's some very good reasons within that country why that happened, though, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. You can all approach Ben afterwards and ask him about it. This is Nepal, same pattern again. This is Uganda, same thing again. There is no reading program that's improved at 2 consecutive time points. Okay, so why? Let's keep looking. We start to look at variation across schools as well. So all you do is you take, it's cross-sectional data, school here, take the average, distribute them out. So this is Kenya. Between 2015 and midterm in 2016, there's some schools with some huge, great big impacts, individual schools. Now try and look at this holistically because there is standard errors involved in this. So you're looking at the overall pattern to get a sense of kind of what's going on. Each one of these is a school. And this is the nicest pattern I've seen by a huge margin. Most of them look like this. This is Nepal, and what you have, if 80% of the actual impact is explained by a very small number of schools, normally 15% or less. This is Uganda. Same sort of pattern again as you see in Nepal. This is very common. This is uncommon. And so the question is, what the heck is going on here? Okay, so what do we do? This is the whole point, I think, why I'm doing positive deviance here, is that we looked at these guys here in Nepal, the ones who are getting the impact. And what did we find out? That it was teachers, head teachers, community members, different people who are the catalyst for change within those schools and within those communities. And they're all doing different things. So to bottle it up and use it somewhere else, I don't think is particularly possible at all. So what it really comes down to is this. The commonality across all these positive deviants is a personality type. If you look at Everett Rogers' Diffusion of Innovation, he defines very well early implementers having a lot of positive personality characteristics that lines up with these guys up here. Communication behavior, rationality, empathy, ability to deal with the abstract, ability to bring other people along with you as well. That's your early implementer. So there's not a lot we can do here. And so really where we had to look instead was down here. That's where the bottleneck is for reading programs, and that's probably the case for many, many systems in places like sub-Saharan Africa as well. How to unlock these guys down here. So we went to Tanzania instead, 12 schools, 17 teachers, qualitative. I'm a statistician by trade, but this is behavior. I'm not a big fan of quantifying behavior at all and motivation. But we had a look at what was going on here, so we used a classroom observation and then tagged that into a teacher interview and didn't look at fidelity, but just looked at and used the classroom interview to say, sorry, the observation to say to the teacher, what were you doing here, what were you doing here, and so on, okay? So let's have a look at what we found out. First of all, 6 years into the program, and that's really important. Teachers were happy, they were content, they loved the program, the reading program. No problems. And also, there's no variability here. 17 teachers, they all said the same thing, and these are the low-performing schools. The homogeneity was actually shocking when we first saw it, because it was not what I was expecting at all. Okay, but it's 6 years in. There's a good reason why they were happy. We'll talk about that in a minute. So what else? They could describe student learning expectations. By the end of grade 2, every kid has to be a low proficiency reader. They knew that. They also felt they had support. Now, they didn't just say it was from an external coach, a WAO. They actually said it was from head teachers or a peer, all over the spectrum. No single sort of source that way, okay? And then they all described their learning process. Someone would come and observe them. They would get feedback. They would go and work on it, try to improve in some way. They described the process. They talked about communities of learning or working with other teachers or their head teacher coming to see them. So they're learning. So what you've got is a lot of good stuff going on here, potentially. What else? They felt that in their teaching, that it was highly God, I can't say that word. Someone else say it for me. Yeah, excellent, thank you. They felt that was going on in the classroom, and they also believed that their students would achieve, the majority of the students would achieve the expectations of that reading expectation at the end of the year, okay? And they were all observed modifying the program in some way to make it fit to context. So, there's a problem here. Nice little things going on seemingly, but we've got a contradiction. We went to the schools with low outcomes, but the indicators came out quite nice. So what's going on? Well, just like the World Bank presentation earlier on today, the teachers are totally unaware of the actual level of achievement of their students. Not even close. The schools that we went to have fluency, reading proficiency levels in the single digits or even lower. Okay? The teachers were focused on curriculum delivery, but not pedagogy. That's a critical clarification to talk about, where they took the phonics-based reading program, they were doing it, but they weren't doing any of the pedagogy they were taught. They were keeping what we call the previous method that they had been taught at teacher training college. And then next, and this is systems thinking, learning was not focused on results. They were checking through the little exercise books, but all the kids were doing was writing things down by rote. There was no actual focus on individual learning, and the teachers were really focused on the good learners at the very front. Okay? And teacher learning was not focused on results. In other words, what are the key things that a teacher should be able to do to improve their instructional practice that then leads to improved learning outcomes? Pedagogy. They weren't focused on improving their pedagogy. They were focused instead on improving on bits of the curriculum, bits of the phonics stuff instead. It's a huge distraction. So if you apply a behavioral science lens to this, it's a socially normed thing, and it was absolutely across all the teachers, and that's what we couldn't really get our hands around. They adopted curriculum, but they kept their default in effective pedagogy. And that's something I think that's really important. It's all about pedagogy, and it always has been about pedagogy. And then what they do, and this is a behavioral economics thing, it's a heuristic shortcut, and it's like, well, I can adopt the content, and teachers always adopt content. I did it in my career as well. But changing pedagogy is something you hardly ever do in a teaching career, and it's hard. So they didn't do that, they just did the easier part of it. And so there's a kind of and it's the second time we've mentioned this in the last 2 days, because I think Yamini mentioned it yesterday as well, cognitive dissonance. It's when you have a disconnect between what your beliefs are and what your actual practice is. So the teachers think they're doing something, but they're actually doing something else instead, but they conclude it in their minds that they're actually doing the right thing. They think they have some that thing that's going on in the classroom, right? And that's why the teachers are content, because they think they're implementing the program, and nobody is telling them otherwise. This is from Nepal, and this is accountability systems. This is when you've got the external coach goes in, has the checklist, and then check what's going on, and then moves on, and so on. And this is from Nepal, so this is observation fidelity to the program with a checklist like this, an average school learning level gain. If you had this in a multivariate regression model, you'd have a beta, you'd have significance, you'd have an effect size, you'd have something to talk about. Put it like this, it's horrible. So what's going on over here? Well, they're getting good marks, but being ineffective because it's focused on compliance, which is something that was mentioned earlier on today as well. Focusing on compliance, accountability systems, that's what we get. All right, so well, here's one recommendation, and this is the Lewis Crouch page that he'll like, is the role of statistics is to describe variation. It's not to make averages and proportions. That's a tool that we apply to statistical variation. And so if you're describing variation in your data, is what we've tried to show you how to talk about today, then you need to think about variation in the solution as well. And this is from RTI's own work to do with gates, and it's a very nice, Gusky thing that no one ever questions about a nice cycle of learning. But I'm not that happy with it. I think it's great for certain personality types. But the reality about change, that it's messy, it's icky, it's hard, it's demoralizing, it's not that easy to do. And so there are other models of change that are actually quite good that I think need to be looked at as well as far as teacher change. This is fine for positive deviance, I think, maybe. All right, a couple of slides to finish up on. Behavioral science. This is what we do a lot in development work. If we see an observable effect, we whack it with a mallet of change. And then we're surprised when it bounces right back at us again afterwards. Because we're looking at the observable effects, but we're not trying to diminish the restraining forces, the social norms that already exist. And unless we can diminish the social norms, adding all this new stuff isn't going to do anything at all. And that tends to be what happens in development work, or it gives a small little impact. And then this is from Michael Fullen, and this is really important as well. We always talk about in development and in education research about the teacher. And that's important. Teacher capacity is critical. But then we take that into implementation as well. And that's a mistake I think we make. I think we have to then focus on not the individual, but the collaborative instead. And that was something that I think was mentioned by the Zambia group this morning about thinking about collaboration. So what are we trying to scrape together money to do? Yep, almost there. Scrape together money to do next is there's nothing wrong with implementing a program top-down. It's the quickest way to get it into the system. But then you need a plan at that point. And that plan has to be thinking about replacing a social norm with a positive social norm. And the only way you can really do that is diffusion. But if the effective pedagogy isn't there, there's nothing to diffuse. So we're going to look at social network analysis to see if there's a way to actually, where are these effective pedagogies and how we can diffuse them. And that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. So we'll move on to secondary grades now. And what I want to do next is to talk about the story of this one school, a junior secondary school in Sierra Leone, which is, it somehow has managed to deliver effective teaching and learning despite facing all the same broad-based challenges of teacher management and school leadership and so on. And of course, in the end, we'll talk a bit about replication. And in particular, we'll hear the voices of the principal and the students from that school as to how they have managed to have the principles of positive deviance within the school. So just a bit of backstory. For the last sort of 6 years, every year we've been doing a large national learning assessment for secondary grades in Sierra Leone through an FCDO-funded secondary education program. And the general pattern has been that overall, the levels of learning are quite poor. We test junior and senior secondary students, and what we see is that they often leave school with around primary grade level maths and English skills. And if you're a girl, if you're a pupil from a poorer household, if you're someone from a very remote school, if you're a child with disability, your scores are even worse. And in particular, across the schools, I think it's worth not undermining the fact that even those schools that are demonstrating positive deviance face some of the same challenges that other schools are facing. So massive pressures of enrollment after the rollout of fee-free education in 2018. Quite pervasive gender-based harassment and violence in schools, which almost without fail we saw in all the schools that we went to, and we talk about that a bit more. And also the issues around managing volunteer or community teachers who are not formally on the government's payroll, very limited instructional times, only 50% of the timetable actually being used for instruction, and then the effectiveness of that instruction obviously is also under question. So we went with these results sort of every successive year. And then at one point, the chief education officer in the ministry, who's the highest in terms of the technical cadre in the ministry, told us, I don't want to see this anymore. Can you please go and do some research in some of the schools? In particular, every year, despite the broad-based dismal picture, we used to see that there are some schools, even in the worst performing districts, who are scoring sometimes even better than the elite schools in Freetown. How is that happening? So basically, he asked us, go and do some deep dive study. We picked 9 schools, did a deep dive, particularly using quite a bit of ethnographic research skills, so including giving little digital cameras to the principal and the teachers and turning the gaze and asking them to tell us how they were managing to deliver learning and teaching in those schools. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at one school. This is a school in a very remote district called Karene district. It's called Barmeen JSS, Barmeen Junior Secondary School. And as you'll see in the film, there's a very strong principal, a group of 5 motivated, unqualified teachers, a strong community, but overall, the school is performing better than the Eton of Sierra Leone. So there we go. Sam, if we can have the documentary. Thank you. What's with the sound? It's not meant to be a silent film, but
between the Dibia and Sanda Mabolonto chiefdoms. This documentary is about a school which is succeeding against all odds. Once known as the Athens of West Africa due to the pivotal role Sierra Leone played in education in the sub-region, education in the country has been declining in recent times with pupils performing poorly in external examinations. However, we have found success in the most unexpected place, a remote community in the Karine district. Join us on a journey to Bamin JSS in a village called Bombodo to find out why they are succeeding. The journey to Bombodo is not for the weak and faint-hearted. It is a long and difficult one. From Potloko, the road is good and paved with tarmac. Soon, the route veers off to an untarred and dusty road, amid fields dried by the scorching sun and sometimes burned by bushfire. Besides the rough and dusty road, the traveler has to contend with the sparkling green Mabanta River, which lies majestically between the Dibia and Sanda Mabolonto chiefdoms. Here, you either use the cable ferry to cross or take a ride on one of the dugout canoes littered alongside the river's bank. The road to Bombodo is rough and sometimes almost impassable. Finally, we arrive in Bombodo, a remote community nestled in the forest of the Sanda Mabolonto chiefdom. Welcome to Bamin GSS. Here, we find a treasure hidden in the forest. A school which is low resource but is determined to succeed against all odds. They were sixth in the Karine district in the 2018 UK aid-funded secondary grade learning assessment. In 2019, they were the best performing school in both mathematics and English in the district. Similarly, Bamin JSS has been performing well in the basic education certificate examination, getting 100% pass in 2017, 89% in 2018, and 90% in 2019.
Bamin, it means it is ours, it belongs to us. Na elimbanim, so now we get her. This school, Bamin Junior Secondary School, na Bombodo, and they been start in 2006.
Members of the Bombodo community and its environs played a great role in the school's establishment and continue to play an important role in its existence.
The school, because secondary school not been there around here, and the people then they sit down together as community level and then decide, say, therefore open a secondary school now here. Because waiting at the thing, the distance is the way them picking them the cover from here to Cambia district, it's too much. Now we meet the primary head teacher. We talk to Ranlengo able accommodate we if not 3 classrooms safe.
In a community where the only economic activity is subsistence farming, support to teachers may not mean much.
The teacher then, like they talk so no not to pay with the pay them more. But if you tell if you around, sometimes they go and take like one cup, two cup, so the comrade for let them you give they eat.
In a school where there is little or no supervision from the ministry, support from the community, no matter how little it is, gives them the chance to hold teachers accountable.
So the chairman and other members of the community then can come and see the school it runs smoothly.
The way how they get teaching and learning material for teach, we get it in different way. Like for the chalk on side, the community then can help. For look we will get chalk at times. Then for the books on side, like mathematics and English language, they will learn we don't help we. Then can supply we, LPM there, together with the picking there.
Sometimes na me can buy some materials where I can go na Luma. I see any book like business, agriculture, other subjects, I can able buy and bring some pamphlet, then I can buy and counter.
Continuous teacher development is important in enhancing teachers' ability to teach.
I'm fortunate for going training, and this level training, the LPM, on the 15th April 2017. I go teach we. Then due to that training, it helped me, like how the steps for just teach, let people understand simple, and the class could be interactive class. After I come out, teach me as without this training, as I can as class, and for just write, if possible, I explain. But due to this training, it don't help me then, I call me other competent. See, now so for go about teaching.
They make it simple for we the teachers there. Simple in the sense, then based on CCTT, that meaning child-centered teaching technique, wherein the teacher no go take the burden all. When they do the teaching together with the pikin at the class, if they ask them, they answer you. We say they no go able, you correct them. Let we learn in mathematics and English, no more be prepared. But since the method we don't get them from English and language, they wouldn't implement them. We don't still implement them by the other subject there. Like social study back, na so back with the teacher. They follow the same method.
Research and anecdotal evidence shows that school time is not enough to cover the syllabus. In most cases, teachers are unable to complete the syllabus before the end of the term.
Looking to the syllabus, we cover a large. And looking to the time we get na school is small for the syllabus. So we thought I'm fit say, together with the principal, say we will conduct extra classes so that we push the syllabus.
Sharing premises with the primary school has its own challenges for the JSS pupils, especially the girls.
But me, in get primary and secondary. But with the secondary now, we not get building. Na primary school then I don't get building. Now I make we dey come on lunch 11:30. Then they come on lunch break 10 o'clock. Where them come on. Then they go make noise per week. Then any some people say if they forget, they go inside. When they outside, then they teach you. They forget. They go inside. Then they all in Kimona we. Oh, can sometimes safe. They meet the place. So toilet them like we na matured picking them. We can get some problem working there, but we pass you go na toilet. We get ready for do that. It is they pass. Like so now where then they alla pa we pass the shame now. Because no any way they by time, no one let us talk by pass you go na OC, take excuse you go na OC.
Because of its remote location, Bamin JSS finds it difficult to attract and retain teachers.
There are teachers who been they come and go. Since na community school, they're not able to stay. And again, the area they say they're not able to stay in this area. So they left with and they go. But we stay because this place now we homeland.
Bamin JSS currently has 6 teachers, none of whom is on government's payroll. Even though parents have agreed to pay some amount of money to support the teachers, most parents cannot afford to pay that little amount. Bamin JSS is the only secondary school within a 10-mile radius, so children walk long distances to attend school.
My name is by Kamara. I come from Mache. I can walk a 4 miles for Mache for Kana school any day. Me sometimes they work in tired now for the workers. Sometimes in the Friday are not able to meet up.
There are some cultural practices that require the closure of schools. There is loss of several days of learning and teaching.
They get that in society. They go there for the whole week. Nobody can school. They go decide for lock the tongue and just perform their own society business. Even we will work. When I tell you the society, they don't pull them pass again for wait some time.
Other cultural practices in the community encourage child marriage.
They get one style now where beginners and born animal. Because it say this is a woman. We initially when I say this is a woman, I begin. Somebody take us in a play, but then I need to play. The beginning gets the stage where they reach. You see, tell and say this man and I say want you. You go see, maybe you go one city back here, then they put on our school.
A key distinguishing factor of Bamin JSS is teacher commitment. Teachers say it is the principle that motivates them.
The principal is so transparent with the teachers there. Anything will happen at the school, they communicate with we. And anything we come for the school, they make a known to we. So your relationship with the principal is good actually, because we work hand in hand with them.
School leadership and management training is important to get the principals to work effectively. It is possible to train on some aspect of the principal's role in in-service training, effective school and teacher monitoring, giving feedbacks after monitoring, management of the teaching staff, motivating teachers. For a school like Birmingham, where 4 out of 6 teachers are untrained, there is heavy reliance on in-service training. Whenever a teacher receives training from any organization, he in turn organizes training for colleague teachers. Even though Lewilan's training is for English and mathematics teachers, all teachers in the school, irrespective of the subject they teach, are using Lewilan's teaching method, and it's working well. Extra classes are organized after school hours to help increase instructional time and to assist teachers to complete the syllabus. CTA support the school in cash or kind, so they are able to hold teachers accountable. The community-school relationship is that kind of mutual respect and the willingness to make the school succeed. This kind of relationship leads to what is called virtuous circle of learning. Here, improved learning boosts communities' confidence, which allows them to give more support to the school, which in turn leads to better learning, which eventually leads to community development, and the circle continues. Schools and communities can't wait whilst the government is doing all it can to improve on education. No matter how resource poor they are, schools and communities can do the little things within their means to improve on education. As they say, little drops of water makes the mighty ocean.
Chair, can I take a minute to just conclude? Thanks. So I'm sure the question on all your minds is, how do we now replicate this success? And I'm afraid I don't have an easy answer to that. I think that's the hardest question with not a straightforward answer, mainly because obviously there's a constellation of actors, behaviors, cultures, norms that has come together for this particular school, which is helping them to deliver teaching and learning. But I can't guarantee that if you did exactly what the school is doing in another context, that would work. But I think something to note here is that routine might be a bit boring, but they are actually doing all the daily routine stuff well, and they're focusing on the fundamentals. So I don't have a single silver bullet or technology that they are using, but they are doing the daily stuff really, really well. You know, ensuring that roles and processes are well communicated, ensuring there's transparency, and ensuring that teachers are all motivated and looked after by the community. And of course, sort of preaching to the choir here, really, but they are thinking of the school as a system. It's not just about the principal or the teachers, but it's about the entire community and the co-investment and productive coalition that they've been able to form here. So thank you very much, and also thank you to several of our Sierra Leonean researchers who are watching this on YouTube live streamed. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. So the next presentation will be online. Do we have the presenters on? Minahil and Sheena, are you there?
Yes,
Okay.
we're here.
Please, take it.
I can't share my presentation until the other one's taken off.
Are you able to share? Okay, it's coming up. Good.
Great. So I'm assuming that you can see the slides, and I'm not sure how the session is, but is my face also just blasting on one of the screens?
Yes, we can see you and we can see your slides.
Great. So we're going to pivot a little bit from the previous presentations and talk about a different level of education service delivery. So our presentation is about understanding how districts plan and implement education policy in Ghana. Next slide, Sheena. The motivation for this project also comes from the idea to align systems of education towards learning from all, and we draw a lot from the implementation and education delivery literature to understand how what roles and responsibilities different actors along the education delivery chain have to improve the quality of learning. And there's very limited literature that talks about the middle tier or the sub-national actors. So anything between the central level of governance and the school, what their roles and responsibilities are to bring about improvements in education quality. We also know very little between whether or not there's this disconnect between what is in policy, in legislation, in regulation versus what their management practices, their engagement looks like on the ground, and what are some of the constraints in terms of resources or capacity to deliver that they may be facing. Next slide. So here, our research is in the Ghana context, but the project is part of a large multi-country study. But here we study districts in Ghana, and districts are a key level within the education hierarchy that are responsible for policy implementation and school support. So Ghana has a decentralized education system. So there are two parallel structures. Political decentralization happens through, is present there, and there are district assemblies that have educational oversight and responsible for infrastructure. But then there are district education directorates on the side that are responsible for planning district activities, monitoring school quality, and implementing central policies also related to teaching and learning. However, there is a gap between policy and practice of decentralization. So, for example, district education offices feel constrained by the autonomy that they have because of other policies that are centralized, centralizing governance at the national level. And over the past many years, Ghana has been subject to many reform efforts that have been taken by both the government and the donor agencies to strengthen their capacity at the district level to deliver. However, our research is trying to investigate what those practices are and how we can support policy implementation and improvements in education quality. Next slide. So we asked two major questions. The first is, what management practices do district education directorates use to plan and implement policy? And second, what factors enable or constrain their ability to plan and implement policy? And we try to look at it through the positive-negative deviance lens, which I'm going to explain in a second. Next slide. So our conceptual framework draws from the literature on educational bureaucracy, and we try to use these 5 management functions that you see on the screen as the basis to understand management practices in Ghana. Again, these can be understood in a way in terms of like ideal type management practices that facilitate bureaucratic functioning. So we look at target setting and prioritization, which basically means what measurable indicators exist to track progress towards certain objectives. Measurement and monitoring draws from ideas around data collection and reporting about performance on those certain targets. Accountability and incentives includes establishment of accountability routines that change behavior and performance towards meeting those stated objectives. And problem solving refers to routines and practices that facilitate discussion and collaboration across a range of different stakeholders. So they could be at the school level, at the district level, at the community level, etc. And political sponsorship is a function that we define as the role that political actors play. But for the context of this study, we think of it as a cross-cutting theme across the 4 management functions that I've just described. So in this paper, we think of deviance as understood in light of these ideal type management functions. So positive deviance is districts which exhibit strong evidence of these management practices, and negative is that exhibit no or opposing evidence of these management practices. Next slide. So our methodology is qualitative research. We look at 5 districts in 3 regions in Ghana and 10 schools. So we've collected a lot of documentation, reports, plans, meeting minutes, and we conducted 43 semi-structured in-person. When I say we, it wasn't actually we, it was our colleagues at the University of Cape Coast, IEPA, who led the charge on conducting the interviews. And we spoke with the regional directors, the district directors, their entire teams, the school inspectors, head teachers, and teachers as part of these 43 interviews that we conducted. On the right-hand side of the slide, we're looking at 5 districts that are part of our sample, which my colleague Sheena is just going to talk about a little bit. But this is just to give you an overview that they differ in their context. So there are some districts where a large population lives below the national poverty line, and there are districts that are doing really well in passing the basic education certificate exams, so the BEC scores, whereas there are other districts that are not doing that well. Next slide. I take it away, Sheena.
Thanks, Minahil. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the findings as a result of our interviews. So similar to the previous presentation, we wanted to start just by saying, so what are district responsibilities vis-a-vis these different management functions? And then what did we see sort of across the 5 districts as common practices and challenges before we get into what we consider a positive deviant case and a negative deviant case. So districts are responsible for determining and developing district and school annual plans. In terms of measurement and monitoring, they are responsible for collecting routine administrative data or EMIS data, conducting school inspections and classroom observations. In terms of accountability and incentives, there are quarterly and annual reporting processes upward to the regional and the national level. And they also participate, as Minahil mentioned, in these political and sort of bureaucratic oversight committees at the district level for education. There are also specific routines in the Ghana district context around problem solving. So these are called SPAMs, the school performance appraisal meetings, which are large community stakeholder meetings, which can take place at the district, circuit, or school level, as well as those education oversight meetings that I mentioned under accountability. So these are the responsibilities they have. What are the practice on the ground in reality when we did our data collection? So we see that these plans are used widely at the district and school level using national templates aligned to national priorities. However, we see a lack of prioritization of the targets in these plans, with hundreds of annual targets for a district in any given year, and that learning is typically narrowly defined as the basic education exam pass rate, which is actually something we saw in the previous presentation in the Tanzania case as well. In terms of monitoring, we see a strong input focus with few indicators in education quality, and a lot of paper-based data collection with maybe only limited digitization in terms of using WhatsApp, for example, to collect data from schools, and inspections being infrequent. In terms of accountability across all 5 districts, we saw regular structured upward reporting being very standard. However, in terms of incentives, there were limited rewards for good performance and sanctions only for the worst performance. And these problem-solving structures existed in theory in all districts, but were infrequent and varied. Another cross-cutting challenge across all 5 districts are capacity challenges at the subnational level. Every single district and school we met had either had delayed allocation of the funding that was due to them to the district or school level, and on those budgets, even when received, were often incomplete, which meant a lack of money for fuel for inspectors to conduct and travel to schools to conduct inspections. And many of the working environments, whether at district or school level, were actually unsafe. Oh, it's frozen. Oh. Okay. So let's take an example of a negative deviance case. This is a district which is considered deprived according to the national definition based on its poverty and on other indicators of access to basic services. In this district, what practices did we see compared to those ideal type management practices that Minahil mentioned? We saw frequent district management turnover. This is a very unattractive district to work in. The district herself had not seen budgets despite starting the role five months prior. So there was real disconnect at the management level. The director could not produce a written vision and could not really tell us what were the clear priorities and targets for that district. And then when we looked at some of the key staff that support teaching and learning in the district school inspectors and first-year teachers, we found that they had received no orientation when they began their role in the district. So the district was not supporting them to be able to implement and do their roles properly. This is a district where the basic education exam pass rate is 40%, and actually 50% of their junior high schools have a 0% pass rate. So 0% of children pass the BEC exam. And yet there was no specific strategy for low performing schools in this district. However, this district did benefit from a lot of support from donors such as USAID, the Early Grade Reading Program, and UNICEF. And we saw that some of the underlying factors there were the centralized teacher deployment issue, so that many teachers that were posted to this district actually never showed up because it was such an unattractive district to work in. And even if they did, they often tried to transfer immediately. And this was due to two factors. One, poor working and living conditions, being very remote, no teacher accommodations. And second, that teachers posted there often didn't come from the region, didn't speak the local languages, and were very, very far from their families. We also saw that this district suffered from lack of resources, so that at the time, a 4-month delay so far in the reception of their district operational budgets, and that inspectors complained of not having fuel to be able to conduct inspections. With an 800-kilometer square district size, fuel for inspections was absolutely crucial. And this led to shallow, infrequent visits by school inspectors to support and visit schools. So they did things like visit 5 schools in a day and just check attendance, and never conducted any sort of classroom observations because they didn't have time. And you can see this quote at the bottom, a school inspector saying, "We feel demotivated because this kind of monitoring is not really doing anything." And SPAMs, these collective stakeholder meetings, were held infrequently, also due to funding constraints, just to provide some food for these meetings. The picture on the right-hand side, you can see a junior high school, probably the opposite case, similar context, but opposite case of what we saw in the previous presentation. This is a 0% school where 0% of grade 9 students passed the BEC exam, fully staffed by first-year teachers who had never received an orientation and were brought to this very challenging context to do their job. How about a positive case, though? So this is a different district in our sample. In this district, the director had a very strong vision and leadership style, and directly around improving BECE scores. So the director themselves said that they didn't sleep because there was really strong political pressure from the region to improve their scores. And what we saw in their management practices was this very clear focus on setting achievable targets with low-performing schools and actually organizing a district office-wide monitoring program for those schools. So on the right-hand side there, you can see a sort of schedule where every professional staff, not just inspectors who were supposed to do visits, but all professional staff were assigned specific circuits where they had to do intensive monitoring and support to low-performing schools, and that had happened over several years. And so their basic education exam pass rate was 60%, which is not great as an average, but they had been formally ranked last in the region, had made steady improvements over the 3 years, and were being hailed as a success story. We also saw very clear examples of two-way information sharing and problem-solving structures that they had set up within the office, which was a really great method to share problems and also have people react quickly to the issues that were raised. However, it did also suffer from a lot of the same funding and resource issues that we saw in our negative deviance case. They had not held any of these stakeholder performance appraisal meetings since UNICEF had stopped funding these programs in 2018. So this office too faced these same budget delays. The things that they received were not sufficient, and they were unable to get the kind of funding that they needed in addition from the district assembly, which could often supplement, in some cases, district education office funds. However, we see, for example, in the quote at the bottom, the very different approach that school inspectors had to the way that they worked with schools. So they say, we do coaching and mentoring for our teachers, especially when we do sit-in observation when they are teaching. After that, we do debriefing with them and then discuss what they need to improve on. On the right-hand side, you can see the lower picture of a school in this district. The teachers there feel very motivated and supported. They had an active professional learning community, which is a national policy, which should be rolled out across all districts, but fully realized in this district and not at all implemented in the previous district that I mentioned. So what do we see? We see that there are positive deviance management practices which exist in some districts despite resource and contextual challenges that cut across all districts in the Ghanaian case. So district actors have agency and find ways to operate effectively, and they themselves perceive these practices as a positive impact on their district's educational performance. But we can't then say that it's just management practices. Although resources are not a binding constraint, the irregularity and inadequacy of funds that districts and schools receive hampers the efforts that districts can make to plan and implement education reforms. This picture on the right-hand side shows a dilapidated, actually condemned district office where one of our district's staff had to work in to deliver the same things that another district would. So what's the next steps here? We've just completed a week ago a follow-up qualitative fieldwork in these 5 districts. The focus of my PhD research is district case studies of effective district support to teaching and learning, where I'm going to be looking at these management practices, the role of politics and relational trust. But I think most importantly is that this was a scoping study, a qualitative scoping study, which gave us insights onto management practices. And these insights were embedded within a larger large end survey as part of the Deliver Ed project in Ghana. So this is a nationally representative survey of 154 districts and around 1,000 schools. And the idea is then to look at variation in performance and the use of these different management practices across these districts to understand sort of, what explains the difference in performance and get us insights towards system reform and how we can improve the delivery of education priorities in Ghana. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've had the 4 presentations, and for me it's a little bit sad because from a few days ago I did actually email these presenters and said, please make sure you tell us something about how those PD practices can be replicated in other contexts, neighboring contexts or similar contexts, and Vatsal didn't say anything about that. Simon said it's impossible. And then Sourovi said, no, it's almost impossible. Minahil and Sheena, they didn't say anything about it. And that's really the big problem. Okay, so we're going to take questions and comments, but I want us to talk about that issue. So we'll take a few questions from the room, then we'll go to the hub in Nigeria, and then UAE is curating the questions online. So any questions from the room? Yes, Jacobus.
One for Vatsal on the Tanzania paper. One of the big advantages of these approaches is to look at some forms of interaction. So I'm just curious of the interactions between, say, knowledge and capacity. I'm also curious for the Ghana team, there was political pressure to improve for that one district, but what was the driving force for that political pressure?
Okay. No, we'll take another question. Can I move this way? Abhijit? Yes?
Yeah, my question was for Simon, where there was this motivating chart, right, which was that anyone who has really great effects until midline and then it always flattens out or declines, that's just mechanical test score decay, as far as I can see, which is that you would never end up being on trajectory, because in order to stay on that trajectory, you would require every gain between baseline and midline to have persisted. And that doesn't seem to be true in any panel we have. It doesn't seem to be true in any treatment effect. So is that maybe just a case of us collectively, as people who work on interventions or people who research on intervention, just having an unrealistic expectation, which is that literally everything that there was an increment between 2 points in time would persist?
Any question this way? Then I'll return to Dave.
So this is kind of a broad question, but something I've always struggled a little bit with the positive deviance, negative deviance literature is exactly this point that that our chair just made, that like, what do we learn from these in terms of doing something anywhere else, I guess is the, I'm always fascinated by success cases, but I also really struggle as, someone who does applied statistics in terms of like, what So I'm just curious, we've got teams who've done a bunch of these, like case studies. So in general, how would you say we think about this kind of positive deviance work and how it should inform our sort of broader analysis for educational change?
That will go to all the panelists. Okay, so let's answer these questions. Vatsa.
So Jacobus, could you repeat, like, I couldn't get, you're saying in terms of knowledge and capacity?
So just if there are any interactions, right? So because it's very flexible, right? The machine learning, so it's not just that variable X is predictive, but it is only predictive if it interacts with Y, right? So were there any important interactions that you picked up?
Yeah, so I think like the picture of like one sort of tree that I showed was that like there's a certain cutoff below like the baseline score. So supposing if your baseline score, if the kid's baseline scores above say 50% or below 50%, then there were consistently like two different types of variables interacting. So like for kids below a certain baseline, teachers reviewing concepts or teachers helping lagging students helps. But for those above a certain baseline score, the teacher's own competency score was more effective. So I think if you can, like, when we aggregate like a lot of trees, we can see patterns that dependent on one variable, what the other is doing. And I'd also like answer David's question from my perspective. I think this is something that Svetlana has also like spoken about a lot is we should make a case for understanding teacher beliefs and teacher practices in a more minute way. So just a good thought experiment would be, as if I'm an education minister, right? I would really care about what the prejudices and beliefs of my teachers are. Like, and if there are studies where we can make it more mainstream, where more and more surveys are capturing teacher beliefs about, do teachers think that kids from poorer neighborhoods or kids from like kids whose parents have a lot of personal problems, can they actually make a difference or not? Like, if an education minister can get that kind of data, more can be done to orient these beliefs, or more can be done to motivate teachers differently. So that is one thing I think that our paper really tries to highlight, is that teacher beliefs are very important, and they should be surveyed more and brought more mainstream into like education research.
Okay. Simon, do you want to make any comment, or that was fine?
Yeah, I can answer the comment about the plateauing, and isn't it to do with just researchers being idiots or something like that, I think you were kind of saying. And for me, often the time the answer is yes. But here's the thing to break it down into. Yes, we do plateau. Why is because a small number of schools go boom, the rest of them are just flat, right? So what do you expect the schools that are moving in the right direction to do the following year? Well, they're not going to double up that effect, right? And that's your point, and I totally agree on that. But what we're trying to do by studying the variation of the negative deviance is basically saying that's where we unlock quality education on a larger scale. So if you can get all those schools that are showing no impact whatsoever to move the needle as well, then the curve starts going up again. But if you're saying that, okay, well, once a teacher for cross-sectionally does increases by 30 words per minute in year one, the following year it's going to be like 5, if anything. Right? Because, you know, I remember a newly qualified teacher years ago when I was in a school basically saying, she was very bored in her second year. I said, why? I said, because I figured out most of the problems, 99% of problems in my first year. The second year, I'm just tweaking things, right? So you're right, but focus on the schools, focus on the negative deviance instead. That's where the impact can increase.
So Minahil and Sheena, anyone who wants to respond to Dave? The question of what do we learn from positive deviance, and at the level of your study, and what can we do with those findings?
So I can try to answer the question on replication, and then Sheena, maybe you can take Jacobus's question. I think that's also a very important part, the political pressure question. So I think that the takeaway from our study is that there are some universal capacity challenges that all districts are facing. So, for example, untimely funds and budgets that the districts don't have to essentially do their job. So I think that even though that's not a binding constraint in the positive deviance case, it's still, I think, across the board is something that needs potentially to be fixed. But we also like say that there is something to be said about leadership training for district staff, and they're giving them the agency to make decisions about how they spend their money and how they approach how they approach their performance targets towards the schools. So we do think that there is potential there. And another thing that that Ghana has done really well, and it's worth mentioning is the idea that school monitors essentially were called circuit supervisors for a really long time, but they've completely rebranding how they approach monitoring. So now they're called school improvement support officers, and that shift in mindset from the role of the district to being a monitor to an organization that supports schools. We did see evidence of that in more so in the positive deviant case than in the negative deviance case. So I do think institutional changes like rebranding the role of the district from a monitor to a support is potentially a good step, and something that possibly can be replicated in other contexts.
To Nigeria, I'm told there are some questions there. Can we get the questions from the hub? Nigeria, are you there? Abuja hub, are you there? Yeah, but I've been told they have some question. Do you have anything online? Not yet. Okay, Sheena, you want to say something very quickly?
Sure. Yeah, the question about political pressure for the basic education exam results. So we saw a difference. We saw across the board that all districts were interested in improving their BEC score results. This is because there are really only two milestones in the educational trajectory where they get some sort of outcome variable. This is a measure, which is a grade 9 and grade 12. However, in this region, the regional minister had created a special ranking of districts and had an annual forum where district directors were invited, and the last ranked district was not invited to the lunch that happened. So there was huge pressure from the political side to improve BEC scores. And this was actually in contrast to what we saw as the annual district planning that they were to do. They had 100 different targets that they had to complete on the sort of bureaucratic or ministerial side. So we did see the very strong accountability drive for and prioritization of BEC results from the political side. However, districts responded differently to this pressure. In our positive deviance district, they worked on really sustainable monitoring and support of low-performing schools. In other districts, they just responded by organizing mock exams right before the grade 9 exam, just to try to boost the scores. So.
Okay, are we ready, Abuja? Yes, go right ahead with your question.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just wondering,
can you put the microphone a bit away from you, extend it a bit away from you? There's a lot of echo. Wow. Yeah. Is it? No, could you write it down? Could you write down the question?
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, but you're not very clear.
Okay, so I'm just wondering about the external of
No, we can't get you. It's a network issue. Please type the question in the chat and we will read it. Is there any other question in the room?
Is the Ghana paper going to be available? I didn't see it on the program.
Julius, could you just explain the context of why they're presenting and not the one that was listed on the program?
Oh yeah, so about the Ghana, oh yes, so sorry about that. We had one presenter fall out of the original plan because they could not travel and they were not well. So we got Ghana to this presentation from Ghana, and it's a district level. All the other papers were school level. but still we're able to fit it in the context of PD and negative. Yeah, thanks. Yes?
In 2 days.
Yeah, in 2 days. So.
At some point, but cut them some slack.
Sure, thanks, Claire. Yes, Alec.
Just a real quick point on the issue of the value of positive deviance. I think people are kind of missing the point. In very complex situations where you don't necessarily know what to do, looking at positive deviance can, for instance, tell you what you ought to be doing a randomized control trial, right? And so, you know, it's really about discovery of potential ideas in very complex situations. I mean, there are cases where simple distribution of knowledge that they find through positive deviance cases, you know, this case of like parents feeding shrimp to their kids in Vietnam in the early 90s. There are cases where it diffuses, that's all that's needed, but it's also just a way of idea.
I couldn't agree more with you, Alex, so that's spot on, yes.
Yeah, no, just to follow up on that, I was also thinking about the question that you posed and then later you posed, and I was also thinking that we can't study high-dimensional complementarities when we, do applied statistics. But what if there's a bunch of things that need to go together for us to get the outcomes that we want? And I think these cases are a good way to see, okay, if these kind of high-dimensional complementarities exist, what do they look like? And I think that can be really useful for us to understand what is it that we need to be looking at, which is what we're also saying. So yeah, I just wanted to.
Yes, Joshua?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think I'd like to agree with colleagues that are concerned, including the chair, about so what? How do we scale up? Because that's really what we need at the end of the day. And RISE should give us an answer. It is research on improving systems of education. So for you to improve a system, you need to go all the way to the point where you have a way of scaling up whatever you are doing in order to improve the system. So, and actually I was very, very hopeful when I heard a few titles mentioning machine learning, because now you're talking about high capacity where you can look at the different dimensions and the relationships that are here, because machine learning has some robustness that other approaches may not have. So I was really hopeful, and I was really looking for that. But I understand you can only do so much within given limitations. So I'm really hoping that we're gonna take that next step to see how we can use the positive deviance case studies and build them up in order for us to move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the positive deviance, because I spent so much time looking at this. It's a distraction, and it's an assumption that it can be diffused. And it's not as simple as that. If you look at diffusion theory, it's about opinion leaders in society that do the diffusion, and that's more often than not a positive deviance. Like I was talking to Ben yesterday saying, we'd like to be a positive deviance like Lewis, but we really can't do that. We can't be a Lewis Crouch at all.
You can be a deviant. No, but...
Yeah, thank you. And so what the positive deviance does is ignore the noise around them. But to unlock everything else, you have to understand what the noise is and release that instead. And that's a very different concept to saying we can just show everybody what positive deviance is and let them all replicate it. It doesn't work that way in diffusion theory. And that's why I think that we are jumping into the whole idea about positive deviance. It just seems too easy, because it is. It's a lot harder than that.
Well, I'll have to be the chairman and end this session. We're out of time. But I think, obviously, we are provoked. And, tomorrow I'll have a presentation here that is built on positive deviance work that was done in Uganda, but I'll be presenting it in COVID-19 situation because many of our original goals were diverted. But I think we'll have a few more discussions about that. It's very important to know how we can get these lessons to neighboring schools. Thank you so much. Let's go for a break.